God's creation is all around us, and we read in the Psalms how creation reveals God's glory. Yet human history has often displayed a disregard for that same creation, and the Church has all too often remained silent about the environment and our destructive impact. When we talk of mission, we rarely hear about the environment, but that doesn't mean there aren't Christians involved in mission in this way. Anne and Dave Bookless are one example. Working with Arosha, a Christian environmental group, they are involved in projects which care for our environment and help Christians connect their faith with environmental issues. They live and work in Southall, London, where they have transformed wasteland into a community park and have brought the church and community together to care for creation and connect mission with the environment.
The reasons I got involved in caring for the environment are quite simple. It wasn't something I'd always been interested in, but some years ago we went on holiday to the Isles of Scilly off Cornwall, and after 2 weeks of self-catering we'd created rather a lot of rubbish. And when we asked one of the locals what to do with it, they said just walk up to the end of the island and throw it over the cliff. And that's what we had to do. That was the island rubbish tip back then. But as I did that, I had a strong sense of God saying, how do you think I feel about what you're doing to my world? And it was one of those moments where my whole worldview changed, and I just started to think through what it meant that this was God's world and not simply a place that I inhabited.
Where we live in Southall, it's a very urban environment, and after many years of living there we discovered a piece of land on the edge of the town which had been completely derelict, trashed with burnt out cars, quite uncared for really, about 90 acres owned by the local council. And a bit like on the Isles of Scilly, we were walking around and it started to ask ourselves the question, what did God actually feel about what we were doing to this piece of land? And so a story began of working with the local council and local people to transform it into a country park. It was a team effort really in transforming the place. The council came in and did the major works with big diggers and so on. And then we gathered together local groups from the community. We had the churches involved, we had local youth clubs involved, the local Young Offenders Institution people came along, local environment groups. Everybody came together and hand by hand picked up pieces of litter and cleared it, ready to make way for the country park. I think caring for creation is something which naturally brings people together. And so it was always at the heart of what we wanted to do, was to bring together the different communities of Southall. So there was obviously the goal of transforming the park, but also it's a fantastic opportunity to bring people together and to share our faith naturally as you're walking around a park, especially with people who aren't used to being in green space. You inevitably start wondering about God and how it all came to be. So there's nothing forced in sharing your faith in that context. We have an education programme with 2 education officers. We go into schools, we do after-school clubs, which the kids love, getting their hands dirty. We have children coming along to the park, tying in with the national curriculum. We have a holiday place scheme, which has a more clear Christian content, and people know that that's what they're coming to when they come along to that.
To me, the environment is a central plank of mission. It's by no means the whole of it, but I now cannot see mission without care for creation as part of it. It's part of God's mission in His world, and it's part of what He's entrusted to us. And biblically, you could say it's the first thing He told us to do. It's the first Great Commission back in Genesis 1, to go out and look after God's world for Him in a godly way. I guess when I first got into this, I assumed that this was all brand new. And what surprised me is, as I've looked back through Christian history and other Christian cultures, I've seen that care for creation has actually been a natural thing all the way through. If you can look back at St. Francis as an obvious example, look back at the Celtic Church here in the UK, look back at many of the ancient churches, the Eastern churches, the Orthodox churches. It's somehow here in the West, back a couple of hundred years ago at the time of the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment, we lost touch with nature, with God's creation, and we've kind of excluded it from our thinking for the last couple of hundred years. In the New Testament, there are 2 words for new. There's the word neos, which means brand new. So if I crash my car and have to get a new one, it's neos. But there's also the word kainos, which is, I guess, if my car isn't a write-off and gets repaired. And the word kainos is the word that's always used when talking about new heavens, new earth, new creation. And it has about it the sense of renewal, of restoration, and perhaps even of recycling. It's the idea that God is going to cleanse all that's gone wrong, and creation Mark II, if you like, the new creation, is going to be all that's good, but with all that's bad removed from it. And that's our hope. That's the hope that God gives us, and it's why we as Christians can be involved positively in caring for creation now.
I have an allotment, a bit like this one, which is right next to my girls' school. And I started it because I wanted to grow organic food and didn't want lots of food miles getting the food to our table. But it's turned out to be so much more holistic than that. I've had children from the local school coming in, and the wonder on their faces as they've planted seeds, watched things grow through the seasons has been amazing. At a personal level, it's fed me really over the last couple of years. I think seeing how things like drought and climate change have affected my allotment has made me feel very connected with people in other parts of the world who are facing much more serious challenges through climate change. I had one fantastic occasion where a teacher, knowing I was a Christian, asked me to come into the classroom to tell the story of the parable of the sower. And I said, come on, that was told outside, come down to my allotment. So we got the children there, we sowed seed on the path, we looked at the weeds, we then sowed it in the actual soil, and a few weeks later they could see through the playground fence it growing, and had the opportunity to then go back in the classroom and explain the whole story, which is such an opportunity.
I think the church here in the UK and in the West in general is trying to play catch up pretty quick. We ought to have been the leaders of the environmental movement. And instead, to be honest, we're having to learn from lots of others who've been doing this, often not in the name of Christ, but doing it very well. But things are changing, and I'm very excited by the way that churches all around the country are catching up on this and beginning to realise this is part of their mission in their local communities and in God's world as a whole. I think there's a call on us as Christians to be involved at three main levels: at the individual and family level, at the church level, and at the national and international level. Firstly, at the personal level, we really do need to look at our lifestyles. I think we've bought into a kind of materialist idolatry, which our society is part of, and as Christians we've just gone along with it. We need to live in a much simpler way, recognising that the earth is the Lord's, it's not ours. And then at the church level, I believe we really need to be involved in our local communities in showing that Jesus is good news for creation. And that may be through running after-school environment clubs. It may be through adopting a local piece of land as a church or as a group of churches and caring for that in practical ways to demonstrate the good news. But today, at a time of global environmental crisis, of climate change and deforestation and so on, we do also need to be involved at the national and international level in campaigning and lobbying to make sure that politicians and business leaders really do what is necessary so that we can have a livable earth.